Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Your Kitchen podcast. As ever, thank you very much for joining me. So today's episode is going to be a design walkthrough, which I'm very excited to share with you. It's a stunning, sort of timeless, open plan design where I'll talk about sort of the logic behind the layout and making sure that we're giving enough space for the kitchen, the dining area, the living room, and then sort of the media wall section that they wanted to add into the design. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about sort of style tips as well of, where we've added certain features to sort of work with the proportions of the room and also the sort of the different quirks of the space. Obviously, I'll talk you through, give you a quick brief on the clients, what project type they're looking to go for, and also from, just a functionality perspective, why we've positioned certain cabinets and certain elements within the space. So it's a gorgeous design to talk through, which is always really helpful from my perspective, and I'm hoping it will be for you too. So what they're looking to do is to extend out so that they've got a separate kitchen, dining room sort of behind, and then a living room space sort of to the right hand side of that. Obviously, there's always things to think about from a lead time perspective, time frames, but also, wanting to make sure that we are giving the kitchen design enough space and making sure that we're not encroaching too much into the dining room section or the living room section as well. So it was quite it's been quite an interesting project to work on to make sure from a scale perspective we've located and we've navigated those proportions all correctly for them. We were in two minds about sort of where to design the kitchen, whether to continue it along the whole back wall here, or whether to sort of keep it as we have onto this section and then incorporate a beautiful big island. The reason why we didn't want to go all the way across the back wall was just because we thought it just looked a bit built in. I always think if you're just cramming your space with lots of cabinets, yes, from a storage perspective, I can completely understand and sympathise as to why that is. But it's really important just to make sure that the furniture that you do include into it, like lots of drawers, like pull-outs, that sort of thing, is really usable, because I guarantee if you've got a beautiful big space like this, you won't need all of the, the storage going across that one wall. And if you do, maybe it's a case of you can incorporate a freestanding piece of furniture of some sort at the end. So it just doesn't look almost like built-in wardrobes. It just wouldn't suit this particular space, we didn't think, which is why we've stopped this particular run here. But yeah, so it's an exciting one to talk about. So to give you a sort of brief that I was given from the client in regards to their appliances, their wish list, that sort of thing. Storage was obviously really important, as we've sort of brushed on. They wanted to incorporate 2 single ovens if they could. They wanted to incorporate an induction hob, obviously with some sort of extraction. From a sink perspective, we were looking at sort of an undermount, sort of 1 to 1 bowl, 1.5 bowl sink. So we were looking at 1 to 1.5 bowl sink. So naturally that will mean that if you're wanting to make that undermounted, we'd need to look at going for a quartz or a solid surface. They wanted to incorporate an island, and they wanted to bring, a bit more of a personality to the island. We were looking at shapes to whether to make it like an L shape or whether to keep it straight like it is now. So I can talk through sort of the method in the madness of sort of designing it how we have, but that was also something that was really, they really wanted to incorporate. They wanted to incorporate a full height fridge and freezer. At the moment, I think they've either got an American fridge freezer or they've got a similar format, because it was important to still have the full height fridge and the full height freezer for them and not stack them, and then have like a larger storage section. And then they also wanted to include a wine cooler somewhere as well, which is normally, wine coolers are normally great to include onto an island space. But in this particular design, we decided to add this somewhere else as well. So just to talk through the format of the cabinetry then. So as you walk into the space, you have your sink sort of on the left on that direct wall as you walk in. And then we've got an integrated dishwasher, sink cabinet, and then an integrated bin. Then we've got a corner cabinet going in, so it's a left-hand hinge. We've done that at 600 ml, which means they can have a nice big corner pull out in there. As I always say, if you listen to my other sort of design walkthroughs, my favourite to have as the corners is the Le Mans, and that's purely just because it's easier to get into and you can pull out each shelf individually. So this would be a great place to store any, like if you've got like a rice maker, a slow cooker, anything really big, like a woks, anything like that, are really great to store in, on those Le Mans sections, like the corners, especially in this design because we've got the one corner and then we've got two single ovens next to that in a tower with a drawer underneath, which is obviously great for baking trays, cupboard above, and then we've got a larder to the right hand side of that. So sort of on that main run, we've got an integrated dishwasher, integrated bin, and then we've only got a few cabinets to actually add any sort of dry goods in, anything else that you want to add into your base, like plates and things like that. They do also have the island as well, which is really helpful, and wall cabinets, but making the most out of the bulky items and using that for that corner section, I just think, was just needed to keep that at 600 ml. As I mentioned, we've then got the two single ovens stacked on top of each other. You can also do this side by side as well if you want to, but in this particular design, to incorporate the corner cabinet, it was really great to have that stacked and then include it's either a 300ml or a 400ml larder pull out to the right hand side of that. With the tall height, sort of larder pull outs, you can either go for the ones that are sort of, pull out as one, or you can have it where they're hinged still, the cupboard's still hinged, and then you can have a space tower, so like a Blum Motion space tower, for instance, where you have lots of individual drawers, which will be the same drawers as your furniture, or you can have them with glass fronted if you want to. It depends how far you want to go with it. But from a functional perspective, it just means that you're organising everything really nicely on each individual shelf. And also you haven't got the weight of pulling everything out. So in this particular design, that larder cabinet would be great for, like tins or any dry goods like pastas. So if you've got sort of a larder cabinet full of tins, like jars, olive oils, that like any sort of, if you've bulk ordered, that'll be your overspill in there as well. So naturally, with sort of, say if you've got 5 or 6 sections of that, it's going to get quite heavy. So pulling all of that out together each time and then trying to get into the section and find the item that you need to find, it can be quite, it's from an accessibility perspective or usability perspective, it can be quite different to how you feel them in the showroom. So just something to look out for, which is why if you can, I would always say to go for drawers. And then you can just pull out the individual drawers per sort of, collection of items that you need, whether it's jars, tins or whatever. And it just keeps it nice and organised in there for you. So that's what we decided to do in there. Then we, of course, had the wall nibs coming in. So this is where you've got the supports for the wall where it's been knocked out, and then you have an RSJ going across. So with this particular type design, that was something to manage because we had an RSJ going across here, and then we had another RSJ sort of coming into that from where some more furniture was, from the walkway in. So we had to obviously figure out the heights of those and just speak with their builder just to make sure that me as a designer knew exactly sort of how high that was coming up, the exact positioning of those, and the width of them as well. So it's super important. Any sort of RSJs that are going into the space, make sure you know sort of the height of those from the floor, and don't just do it from if you're doing it and you haven't got your new floor laid and then you've got like an exposed beam, you've got to make sure you track it and measure it when the beam has actually been cladded. So that you've got, because sometimes you obviously have an extra thickness for boards and things to clad around that. Some you might want to leave it exposed. That can look really nice as well. It just depends what sort of design you want to go for. Personally, I wouldn't have any exposed ones in this design because it's more of a sort of timeless classic design as opposed to like an industrial sort of modern seamless look. So that would be, you know, again, something to think about. And then we decided to put their fridge freezer to the right hand side of that beam. We could have put we were looking at options to put cupboard over that, which you can do, or even if it's sort of a single hinge door, so that the door goes over the full width of both the cabinet next to it and then the actual, you know, the section that's sticking out. But you've got to think about obviously where your hinges are placed as well, because you need about 100 mil for your hinges to be fixed onto the cabinet and then onto the door in order for that to be able to open. But what we decided to do on this particular design, because we didn't want to have lots of narrow doors going everywhere, and if we were to do the latter option of, you know, making the door width, so it is the width of the 300 or 400 mil cabinet as well as the nib, one, it will be over 600 mil. So with the suppliers that we were working with, they won't do it sort of one door. And two, the hinge would have been the wrong way. So it just wouldn't have worked. So that's definitely, you know, so this for us was definitely the right way of doing it. So what we actually did with this sort of nib wall section coming out here is we brought it out more than the 580 mil deep cabinetry for the ovens to the left of it. And it was a conversation I had with him. I just said, look, rather than everything being sort of flush, you've got quite a few different heights and levels going on in different places. Why don't we bring that nib out a little bit more? And that means that the cornice itself will sit, you know, nice and flush because it's at a tangent. So you don't have to, the fitter doesn't have to think about you sort of finishing off that, you know, leading into that wall. But also as well, we just had room to bring the fridge freezer off the wall slightly. So it was about sort of, I'll probably say 80 to 100 mil off the wall over that nib. So therefore we had the detailing of the tangent cornice sort of going around and into that section as well, which looked really nice. But that's why we did it like that, just so it wasn't like a flush sort of, you know, fitting kitchen on that side. It had a little bit more depth and had something, you know, different that they could look at and you know, sort of include into their design. Also, what was nice, the particular door range that we're using, it's second nature. We were looking at Mornington, which is a shaker design, which is available in the standard shaker, or it's got the beading in, or they've recently launched one that's called Mornington Veil, which is the one that imitates the look of an in-frame kitchen. So it's still one door, so it's still classed as a lay-on door, which is the industry term for a door that's hinged normally and takes up the whole space. But it adds sort of a routed out line around the outside, so it looks more like a in-frame kitchen. But from a price perspective, obviously it's less in cost. So that's why we opted for this particular kitchen. And also in this range, what is lovely is they do full height doors with a single cross rail going across on the over where the fridge and the freezer are. So again, just works really nice, and incorporating and working with your designer and suppliers to figure out what sort of doors and things are available. If any sort of full height, like larders or, you know, a fridge or a freezer like that, check to see whether they can do it in a full height door, because it does just look really lovely. If you're going for a fridge freezer in the same cabinet, naturally you need the door split. So what I would say to you, if you're doing a design with that sort of format, that's fine, but just make sure all of your doors marry up to the same, so the same bottom door height. So say if you're going for a 70-30 fridge freezer, you'd have a 720 at the bottom and then a 1250 at the top. So if you have any larder cabinets, whether it's directly next to it or anywhere else in the room, make sure you've gone for your 720 and then your 1250 at the top, or taller, as long as it's sort of the split's still the same. And it's things like that that sort of keep that, keeps it continuous in your design and keeps it and makes it look more considered. So yeah, just a little top tip from me there. And then we've got the room to have obviously the beautiful big island space. So we, from an appliance perspective, we were sort of debating on whether to incorporate a mantle section to a right angle to the sink. But then obviously because we needed to incorporate the single ovens, the fridge freezer, that would definitely mean that we would be encroaching on the space around the corner. So again, it just looked too fitted. And we did do an initial design where I tried to put a mantle in this side, and I'm happy they were like, it just looks too cluttered. So we were super happy with how open and how usable that section is now, with the worktop as well running round from the sink to, you know, the adjacent wall to where the single ovens are above where the corner cabinet is. So on the island, this meant then we needed to incorporate the hob. Naturally, extraction is always something to think about when you're looking at incorporating a hob on the island. So with this particular design, what we did was we were going for an integrated extractor. So it's like a venting hob, that's the sort of terminology for them. And the reason we went venting was, one, because it just doesn't draw attention, having anything sort of coming down from the ceiling, as, you know, from an extraction perspective. They wanted to keep, you know, the furniture and the detailing on the furniture and the space itself. We wanted to keep that, you know, where the eyes were sort of drawn to, as opposed to making a feature out of sort of the extraction on the island. Also, there's cost implications to that if you want to, you know, go for something a little bit more bespoke. But granted, in some designs, you know, that works beautifully if you get it, you know, if you do that really well. But also something to think about from a practical perspective with this particular layout was we've got the RSJ running across atop, you know, above or just behind where the extraction would need to be for that hob. So it's just it's just easier to make sure that we've got, you know, the venting hob on the island. And also because we've got the depth, because we've got a beautiful big space that we're working with, we could make that deeper in order to allow for full size or full depth drawer packs, like 3 drawer packs going across the front, and then the reduced depth cabinets at the back, and then the seating. So that meant that the actual recirculating or ducting section of the extractor could go out the back of the hob, all the way down to the floor, and then out underneath the floor if it's being ducted out, or if it's being filtered, it can go out the back, down to the floor, and then back out to you at plinth level. So that's why, you know, again, it wasn't affecting, not any of that sort of venting system or filtration system wasn't actually affecting the drawers underneath. So that's why, again, the venting hob just seemed like a perfect choice. Also, it gave them the amount of cooking zones and things that they needed. The island itself having 3, you know, beautifully big drawer packs, which I believe were, so we had a metre and then 2 600s either side. It just meant you've got a beautiful big space for your venting hob, with still a drawer at the top able to be accessed, but just a smaller drawer and lowered down, and then the big drawer underneath, and then two sets of 600mm, sort of, you know, one either side, and those were 2 drawers as well. So it meant that these particular clients can prep, you know, got ample space either side to prep, and then use that hob from there. Also, I said earlier that there was a few different configurations that we wanted to go for the island. The way that it is at the moment, you've got the 3 drawers, the reduced depth cabinets at the back, and then the seating is along the back and to the right hand side. So again, I always say from a seating perspective, it's always really interactive to try and seat your guests at a right angle, as opposed to just 4 of you sat and looking straight at a wall or at sort of the person that's cooking. It's just not very interactive if the person on the ends of that, the seats want to talk to each other. So that's why, positioning them on an angle really works well. These were going to be used for sort of, homework, just, breakfast, so they were going to be used quite a lot. So we wanted to make sure that we had 5 seats available for the adults and children involved. And then there were conversations about trying to make the actual shape of the island almost like an L shape. So almost having the island go straight across like it is, but then also come out and go further into where the dining room space is. And sort of when you're looking in the room, you would be like, yes, you can absolutely fit that in. But actually, when we logically sort of, looked around what elements and what size table they wanted to add in, so they wanted a 10-seater table. And then we had a media wall in the living room section, and then a big L-shaped seating, like a corner sofa to think about. When you actually add in the additional elements of that room and the different items that are needed, we found it was just looking too cluttered. And it would have been a case of we would have just added on sort of like maybe 800 to a metre max onto sort of the side of this island, which would have disrupted the seats that we had where the dining room section is. It would disrupt that sort of flow round by that section. And and also because there was so much going on from a design perspective, we just felt we didn't need it. So that was a decision that they were happy to go down from just to keep it nice and simple and to really focus on the detail, the colour combinations, and the actual functional storage options. Opposite the island, I thought this would be a great place to incorporate the wine cooler in almost like a breakfast dresser section. So this was to the left of the sink and to the left of the main walkway. So it's over more towards where the living room section is, but I just thought from a storage perspective, they can house their toaster in there if they wanted to, any sort of, whether it's glassware, you could almost turn it into a little bar if you wanted to, if they do a lot of hosting. It just gave them an extra space to have and work from if they want to. So you can add sort of electrical sockets in the back, having sort of a dresser with like 4 doors on it. You can have your sockets at the back and work from in there if you want to. It just alleviates having a microwave or like a toaster on the side. So even though you're walking to it a little bit away from where you would normally do your cooking, if it's occasional items, or it might just be a case of you store it there and then you bring your toaster out onto the main run when you want to use it and then you pull it away. That would be, the purpose of that particular cabinet. And also, if there's anything from a living room perspective that you need to add in there, you might want to add or dining room, like your placemats, if you've got Christmas tableware or anything, or you've inherited a dinner set, whatever it is for your situation. Again, it just allows you to have a different space there. And the thing that's great about the bifold cabinets is you can open them and then just leave them open. So if you then had those as solid wood doors, so just singular doors, like a 500mm or 600mm wide, if you wanted to keep those open, whoever was walking in through the door, naturally you're going to walk into that cupboard. Whereas because they're bifold and they're half of that depth, the depth is taken up onto the base cabinet anyway. So we've done I believe it was about a 450mm deep for the dresser cabinets, and then we've kept the cabinets at 560 deep because obviously we've got the wine cooler, and then your worktop that brings it out to 600mm and your door to 580. So that's how we've managed that situation. But we could have incorporated it into the island. Like we could have, another place that we could put it is if you didn't want your wine cooler here, you could add it into the back of the island and keep it full depth. So again, I always think wine coolers or bookcases or open shelving or anything like that always works really well on the decorative side of the island. So especially by seating, it's a nice way to encase that seating if you sort of don't want it to look like it's just got seats everywhere. You want it to have a bit more of a design sort of feature. Maybe if you want to, if that suits your particular layout, that would be, a way to do that. But in this design, because we needed to stick to 5 seats, and we didn't want to make the island any longer to encroach more into the living room space, we made a feature out of the wine cooler and moved it with a bifold cabinet, and just extra storage underneath there. I can imagine with children and just, if you host a lot, you just need a lot of usable storage. So again, it's going through the process, and almost when you have sort of an initial design together, write down what it is you're actually going to store in each cupboard, because by doing that, you can make sure that you are, one, optimizing the storage as much as possible and tailoring that to what you need. But also, it just means that, you know what's going where, and you know that you've got enough. And you don't have that anxiety of, oh God, well, we'll just sort it out once it's fitted. Try and sort it out before, if you can. Obviously, granted, if like these clients, you're looking to do an extension project, obviously you've got other things to think about than that. But if you can, sort of during the kitchen design process, before you press the button and finalise that design, just pinpoint what you're going to store where. It's really important to do that. Or if you do have time and you need to sort it out, just bring everything out onto the floor and then pop everything into the correct location. So that's definitely something to think about from there. This then leads us onto the media wall, which we've got at the back of the room. So the media wall, they wanted it to look sort of integrated again, but it needed to suit the timeless element that we've got in the rest of the design. So we did a few different formats for this. One that we finalised was to have drawers going along the bottom, and then we were having sort of vertical posts going down to imitate the in-frame look again, and then beautiful shelving going across, T&G panelling at the back to sort of match the ends of the island, and sort of any exposed panelling everywhere else, or any exposed furniture everywhere else. Again, T&G panelling is normally an option in most places now, whether you're sort of going, high street all the way through to, your bespoke. You can either have your T&G panelling, your plain panels, which again obviously suits more modern aesthetics, or you can go for sort of shaker panelling as well, which a lot of companies provide, and you can sometimes do them out of doors if you want that sort of around your island and have a little bit more of a bespoke look. We decided to go T&G panelling everywhere. I think, again, it just works, and because we were incorporating T&G panelling onto the media wall at the back of where the TV is, again, it just ties everything in really nicely. Something else that we incorporated from a detail perspective on this section, and also where the fridge freezer is, we were looking at incorporating a moulded plinth around this section. So again, with an in-frame kitchen, you can have recessed plinths, which is standard, and then you can have your moulded plinths, where the plinth sits on top of the bottom of the frame of the door. Stay with me if it gets a little bit technical, but basically the doors are made taller so that if a moulded plinth is needed, the moulded plinth can attach to the bottom of that frame and not affect the opening of that door. But because we're sort of imitating this, and we're not going for an in-frame, we're just going for sort of what's called a faux frame or a look-alike in-frame on this particular design, you need to make sure that the moulded plinth has something to fix to. So normally it's like a palmet or something, but the fitter and your furniture supplier should know about this. And you just have to sort of fit it at the bottom, have panels or posts to lead that into, and then you can sort of imitate that beautiful look across the bottom of your furniture. So the reason why we've added the moulded plinth underneath the fridge freezer and underneath where the media section is, we purely did that because those are more sort of decorative elements. And then we chose to keep the recessed plinth going all the way sort of, where the working kitchen is. There's a sort of big debate about this, whether the recessed plinths are more functional than if you'd have a moulded plinth, because you've got to think if you're stood by your hob all the time, or if you're stood by your sink, they're normally the two places that you're stood the most sort of facing your appliance or sink. You've got to think about your feet and where they're positioned. So if you've got slippers on with like a hard sole on, that will be touching that moulded plinth constantly. Or if you wear shoes in the house or you've got indoor shoes, you've got to think about, that will be scuffing, or, your feet will be touching that underneath. If you're going for a lighter colour, that's again something to think about. Darker colour, you're looking down the route of like chipping, things like that as well. So just be mindful. I don't want to deter you if you're like, yes, I absolutely want to have moulded plinths everywhere because it looks beautiful, but just be mindful when you are using the space not to try and scuff the plinths, which I'm sure you won't in your lovely new kitchen, but just in case you weren't aware. But that's why we chose to do those particular features on those sections. Lighting was super important within this space as well, because they're extending out, and the kitchen is in the space sort of, at the back, where like the furthest away from like the windows or the new bifold doors. Yes, there's going to be loads of beautiful natural light coming down from the ceiling in the dining room section and coming into the lounge, because they were having double doors on that side as well. But it was just sort of thinking, we've got to make sure that we're incorporating enough light in that kitchen space. So if it was me, I'd personally look at incorporating some pendant lights over the island. We were looking at incorporating above where the sink section is. We were looking at incorporating sort of an open shelving section there, which is a great way to have light on the open cabinet section, but also underneath all of the wall cabinets as well. Inside your breakfast cabinet as well. So when you're opening that up, you could, or your bar, whatever you want to call that dresser, when you're opening that bifold dresser up, do you want that to automatically be lit as you're opening it up? If so, make sure you've got the correct sensors, or you speak to your supplier and your kitchen designer about that. So in an open plan space, when you're not always just directly using it for a kitchen, you need to have task lights for your kitchen, but then also the ambient lighting going on around the rest of the room. So media walls and any more built-in furniture is a great way of incorporating that ambient light in the sections. So we were looking at incorporating sort of, strip lights underneath all of the shelves, or you can go for ones now that are on like a flexible strip, and they just get routed out vertically down each side of an open section like that, and they're super thin, and you can just put your shelves wherever you need to go. I know Sensio do them, and yeah, it just makes it a little bit easier than having to think you've got to have something quite bulky fitted to the back of the cabinet. Also, something to think about was the back section here and how to utilise that space, the best from a practicality perspective, for whether to go for a splashback, use the quartz material for, that we're using on the worktop, tiles as well, or whether to just go for a single upstand going across. So practicalities for different types of these is, obviously, if you're going for an upstand going all the way across, works well. But equally, you can think about sort of the splashes on the wall. So you might want to have an upstand and then a little bit of a sort of splashback above that, which is about 300 mil high, just to, if you are splashing a little bit while you're washing up, you don't have to think that's going on your wall. It could be that you want to make a really big design feature on that side. You could go for a beautiful antique mirrored splashback. Again, this is opposite where the garden is, so again it would reflect that natural light in really well, especially in the space that doesn't have any windows. That's incorporating any sort of mirrored splashbacks to reflect and bounce that light around, is a really great option. Also, you could have just quartz going all the way across there, but on a slab size that big, you would be paying for a whole slab just to do that one section. Because we are moving the shelves up slightly to allow for headroom, sort of while you're at your sink as well, you've got to think about not going just straight across with either the splashback or the quartz. You've got to think about going across and then up to where that open cabinet is, and then across and round there. It's also whether you obviously will need sockets on that wall as well. So in this particular design, we wasn't going for a hot tap, so therefore we needed to go for a kettle. Think about obviously your sockets behind there as well, where they're going to be positioned. Where's the best place to make that cup of tea or coffee in the morning from? Will it be the left of the sink, or will it be the right in the corner? And how sort of you will use that space in order to establish sort of where you need those sockets. Sockets is obviously another question mark for the island as well. So naturally you're going to be running wires or new wires to that island. So why not, just from an infrastructure perspective, make sure you've got, more wires available to allow for sockets, and forward think that before your new flooring goes down. I always think if this is a place to do homework, or it's a place to, eat breakfast from, or, just sit down, wife, say if husband's cooking you dinner or whatever, and, the children or yourself's cooking, and your children just want to sit somewhere but not on the living room, just catch up on the day, they might want to show you something on their phone, they might need to charge that, or they might need to use their laptop if they're doing homework. So therefore you need sockets of some sort around this island. So personally for me, a good place would, if you wanted to hide them, would be to go opposite the ovens on the side of that cabinet there if you can. You've got to think about the depth of the plug socket as well. So naturally they always look really thin, which is great. So you think, oh my God, I can put them anywhere, but you can't. You've got to think about the actual socket box as well. So where you plug into, obviously the plug is so deep, and then you've got, the actual box itself that has to be fixed somewhere. But normally on an island, and what we've used here, we've used 50mm posts going down. So that should be sufficient enough to be able to then fix that, socket on the side. Or if it's not, then you'll have an 18mm thickness to the cabinet as well, before then it's encroaching on the drawers and the sort of the runners for those drawers. So you could pop them there. You've got options as well, because we've got reduced depth cabinets all at the back of here. You can have a socket in the worktop, which can look quite discreet, or you can make it a design feature. You can have the big ones that pull up, or the ones that you press and then they come up. I can never work them. Or you've got the ones that are simply the Evo line sort of flip ones. They just flip up, and then you've normally got 2 socket spaces and then USB ports as well on there, and then you just turn it back over and your worktop looks nice and flat. With the reduced depth cabinets underneath here, that means that the sort of the height of that sort of the socket box can then sit sort of into one of those reduced depth cabinets. It just means that, you're not having to have like a working drawer or anything like that, and then it's catching at the top of that. From a colour perspective, these particular clients they like the look of like the 2-toned kitchens, and I always think it's quite difficult to know where to add the colour. So what I'll talk you through sort of the logic behind why we've chose to do it sort of this way. We wanted to make sure it wasn't too dark, especially as we mentioned in this section. So they wanted to go for a neutral palette, for the main parts, which would be in porcelain or like a taupe grey. So taupe grey is like a warmer version of a porcelain. So porcelain to white is a white tone, but with more of a grey undertone. So it's a slightly different sort of colour if you put them side by side. Then if you were to compare taupe grey to that, it's classed as another neutral, but it's just got a warmer tone to it, and it's not pinky like cashmere. Taupe grey is a really beautiful colour actually. If you're not wanting to, if you don't like anything sort of, that's pure white, and you want to have that sort of more homely, warm element, that's when the taupe works really well. And then what we did was, for the island, we're looking to piece that in the storm blue, which is a bespoke colour for this particular furniture supplier. So therefore it will be obviously more in cost, but because we're going neutral for everywhere else, and then on the island, we're having the injection of colour. And then of course you can imitate that colour in other areas as well, like, you know, ornaments and things like that. It's, you know, it works really well. And from a design perspective, you know, suits the room and suits the sort of taste of the client that they were after at that time. So I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Obviously, the design that we're talking about is amazing, which always helps. Like, it's a beautiful big space. You know, it's a timeless classic, which I always love to talk about. But I'm just hoping it's helped you sort of think about, you know, things differently with your space. Maybe you can incorporate a bifold dresser as opposed to, you know, a single door dresser. Yes, it will be more in cost, but from a functionality perspective, it just works better. Looking at ways to make your storage more usable as well. Also, not try and go for that built-in look everywhere. Like, look at ways that you can incorporate sort of the design with the architecture and leaving space where it's not needed, certain elements. But yeah, hopefully, I'm hoping it's been helpful. As I always say, if you've got any further questions about anything, do reach out to us on our social platforms, which is at Love Your Kitchen Podcast. Or if you've got more of a, you know, relevant design question, or maybe you might want me to look at your design, reach out to me on my design service website, which is fayenewmandesign.com. And yeah, I'll happily help you. And also, it's always great to find relevant topics for the show. So thank you again for watching. Until next time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.